From the end of World War II in 1945 and the destruction of the Berlin Wall in 1989, on this week's episode of Red vs. Blue, we'll be investigating the impacts and influences of the Cold War on Germany throughout the 20th century. The Cold War can lay claim to be one of the most important periods of time in German history. It marks the end of the tyrannical period of extreme nationalism and the beginning of external factors within the region. During the early years of the Cold War, West Berlin was a geographical loophole through which thousands of East Germans fled to the democratic West. As a direct response to this, the communist East German authorities began construction on a wall that would encircle West Berlin. The Berlin Wall was a formidable construction that reached an unthinkable height of 3.6 meters. Its stretch of 96 miles is evidence of the future consequences it was to bring for not only Berlin and the sides of Germany, but perhaps to the rest of the world as well. Construction began when hundreds of armed soldiers and labourers were deployed to guard and place barbed wire across the division in which the wall was to be built. Within weeks, the wire fence was fortified with concrete, and the second fence was to be built in 1972. People were fearing the future already, and an attempted escape resulted in immediate death. This area became known as the Death Strip.
East Germany, formerly the German Democratic Republic or the GDR, was a state in the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War period. The GDR view of West Germany was that they were unreconstituted fascists and that they only wanted to sabotage the innocent GDR who were protected by the Soviet army. Salaries in the GDR were about 1,200 marks or $250 a month. If you wanted to rent a flat in the East, that would cost you around 32 marks or $6 a month. Money in the East was not a major problem, but the lack of quantity and distribution of goods was. People would have to wait years for materials to build infrastructure. People in East Germany would have children just to be granted housing. There was a reward system in place for families having children, since most working women were required to leave work sometimes several times a day. However, women did have advantages if they had a child or were taking care of children. One of these was a requirement placed upon employers to rehire women into the workplace after maternity leave. Most men were judges and doctors, so the mother was usually in charge of the family. Most fathers would expect dinner on the table at supper time. In the GDR, there was free medical care, but not of the highest standard, and free kindergarten was also provided for children and families. In terms of education, there were equal opportunities for all people in East Germany.
If citizens wanted to receive a tertiary education or attend university in order to receive a more valuable career, they were required to join the FDJ, a social club or scout group for all citizens.
Members wore blue uniforms somewhat resembling the Hitler Youth during the Nazi period. After gaining respect in the FDJ, members were assured a promising future.
Communism, an economic system theorized by German philosopher Karl Marx, heavily focuses on the economic equality of all and the abolition of social classes. This equality is found through the communal ownership of natural resources, as well as all means of production, such as agriculture and industry. Throughout the Cold War and 20th century, as much as 1/3 of the world's population lived under a communist state. However, true communism was never reached by even the Soviet Union, and the individual rights of these people were often ignored or abused. Communist governments ruled with a zero-tolerance policy for opposition and allowed bureaucrats to determine wages, prices and production amounts of all sectors of the public industry, corrupting the country and providing a poor lifestyle for citizens. Capitalism, or a free market economy, is an economic system more commonly found in the Western world, involving privately owned means of production guided by the operation of markets. The system is based heavily on individual rights and the separation of the government and economy. There are many forms of capitalism, with laissez-faire capitalism involving no government interaction with regulations, tariffs, or subsidies. Welfare capitalism, on the other hand, involves businesses or the government providing welfare services such as insurance, medical care, or welfare payments to help limit costs for citizens. A major issue involved with capitalism, however, is the major welfare inequality that separates those who own private business from the working class. This is commonly pointed out by proponents for a more communist state, and was one of the largest reasons for Marx to produce his theory. The influence of the Cold War played a large role in the political and social circumstances in which those residing in West Germany lived under. West Germany, a territory which was formed with the annexation of the French, British and American zones of occupation, was the NATO-backed and the capitalistic side of the German split. Funded through aid provided by the United States in its early years of formation, West Germany became more stable and established, leading to numerous economic reforms led by the government in 1948. The economic reforms, which included the changing from the Reichsmark to the Deutschmark, halted the rampant inflation that was present in post-war Germany, eliminating large amounts of poverty and increased jobs within the industrial sector by 35%. From the 1950s onwards, West Germany became one of the strongest economies in the world, rivaling Nazi Germany before the war. West Germany was also established as a parliamentary democracy, with a free, capitalistic market, labour unions and free churches. The West German government was also included in the Western European Council, cementing their position as a valuable ally towards other Western nations. German culture remained relatively consistent throughout the period of the Cold War. However, the West had larger amounts of American influence and was largely cosmopolitan. Throughout the period of reunification, which proved to mark the end of the Cold War, minimal changes were made to the daily life of West German citizens.
Now we come to the final and perhaps most dramatic stage of the Berlin Wall, its destruction in 1989. The 9th of November 1989, and the Berlin Wall was finally opened due to mass protest. East Berliners rushed into West Berlin and were greeted by ecstatic West Berliners on the other side. Crowds began to climb the wall and tear down sections of the concrete floor.
2 million tonnes of concrete and 700,000 tonnes of steel were disposed of, with sections now being kept in museums. But why did the Berlin Wall fall, and what factors contributed towards it?
Well, one could say that the decline in communism in East Germany was only exacerbated by the faltering of communism in Poland, Hungary and Czechoslovakia, with a peaceful protest of unprecedented size rippling across Europe. The economic system of the Soviet Union was crumbling, leading to an implosion that was reinforced by the military firepower of the US and NATO backing them down, further bankrupting them.
Ironically, it was the vast empire of the Soviet Union that led to their eventual downfall, as it not only spelled out the end of communism in Germany, but also the end of the Cold War.